What up, y'all? Today I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about like the Millennial Kingdom. So how do I start with this? Okay, so how Christ rules and reigns for 1,000 years, right? With the saints, or the saints rule and reign with him. And if you've been listening to my channel here on Revelation N505, you'll understand that people like I believe that we are post-millennial kingdom, although I grew up believing, just like most of all of y'all evangelical types believed, that, you know, Christ, we were still waiting on, you know, the fulfillment of his return. And it always looks like that we're heading towards the new world order with technology and all of that. But now I have spent 20 years investigating conspiracy theories, technology, megaliths, monoliths. I went to seminary school, and a lot of time was spent on different types of projects that were in the Bible. You know, from, you know, the giants of Genesis 6 and the fallen angels, you know, the serpent's seed, the Garden of Eden, the pre-Adamic era, or the pre-Adamic era, meaning the gap theory, or when it was just the angelic hosts and, you know, whatever God had created during that era before they fell. And then at some point in time, I landed on this thing people were talking about called the mud flood conspiracy in late 2018. And the mud flood conspiracy was basically related to the topic of that somehow in our recent past history there was a worldwide catastrophe that caused this term in geology, or in science of geology, it's called liquefaction. Liquefaction occurred, and this worldwide catastrophe that hit everything on the earth occurred in and around 1812. Okay, 1811, 1812 is what it seems like, and there's ways to acknowledge this. So first of all, a lot of buildings, how you can tell that something major worldwide occurred is because there was volcanic activity at that time that destroyed a lot of things. At that same moment in time, there was earthquakes, you know, that broke apart. And I think there was that Madrid earthquake in North America and South America that, you know, caused a lot of ruckus. And then the maps changed in and around that time. Like every shoreline and, you know, places where there are deserts now, there were cities, or where it was, you know, where it's freezing cold now, there was no ice and snow, and there were cities. And now there's like no cities. And it looks like some of those places, like Siberia, for instance, has been bombed to smithereens, but it used to be full of major cities in and before 1812. 1812, the weather changed. It began to get really cold, where they had to shut down parliaments. And then you started to see also that at the same time, this generation is called the lost generation. But I'm just getting up to, this is a millennial king thing. They had added 1,000 years to the calendar. I believe they added 1,000 years to the calendar that the moment the millennial kingdom ended and Satan was loosed from the abyss. But liquefaction is basically that the suggestion that is connected with it, with liquefaction in and around 1812. So most of our history is false, but there's always the truth in the lie. And so in and around 1812, what seemed to have happened was there was a comet that went over the earth, and as it was going over the earth, it went over the whole earth, And when it did, there's the sound from the comet because of the height of it, maybe. It was, lower than normal. I don't know exactly, but it has a sound to it. It's like, if you had an 18-wheeler drive by you, it'd be really loud, right? And it would vibrate things. Well, that's how this comet operated. It came over the Earth, and it also, the sound, and it also caused some sort of pressure, and it caused what's called liquefaction to occur, which means it causes everything under the ground under the dirt in the ground. If you dig deep enough, you'll get a well. Like, that's why we drill for wells. You could drill them for anywhere, because before we had city water, we would just have the well guy come out and basically drill a pipe way deep until he hit water. Okay, and then they would hook up a pump, and that would be your well and septic. That means, like, anywhere you live, pretty much, there was no dry place down under the earth. You could always catch water somewhere. I mean, there are lands out there, very rare, but that don't have water underneath it. So they're very cheap. They're not worth a lot of money. But for the most part, you can go just about anywhere and drill for water. Just drill a pipe down. Well, so there's aquifers under the ground. And so what happened is the sound and the pressure caused liquefaction, which is, it caused the dirt on top of the earth here that we're walking on to mix. The pressure and the sound from this comet caused the water to bang together with the dirt, and it caused it to all liquefy into liquid mud. And so what would happen in a situation like that is if you had like 10 cement blocks on top of the earth, they weigh a couple 100 pounds, or 100 pounds or something, so they would sink. Okay, and then what would happen is that mud would dry, and it would dry, and however long it took to dry after it had liquefied and that comet had went away again, then those cement blocks, some of them will be covered in under the earth. Okay, and some of them would still be there. Well, that's what happened to all of the building structures on top of the earth at that moment in time. It caused, like, for instance, if you had, like, let's use a building that's common, like Washington, D.C.'s Capitol building, okay? So D.C. Capitol building, if you look at that building, chances are, so any building in and around 1812 or before, you're going to see that they go deeper into the ground. And this is anywhere in the world. We're talking about from Sydney, Australia, to the Americas, to Europe, to Russia, France, anywhere, Africa, it doesn't matter. And so these structures are sunk in the mud, and also the shorelines are smaller. Places that were connected, like I think Tasmania was connected to Australia. Now it's an island or something like that. So on the maps before, California was an island, but what connected it was what's possible is there was volcanoes, there was earthquakes, and then there was the liquefaction, and liquid mud also ran down the mountains. And so that's how California would have gotten connected from an island to a part of the homeland. And they'll tell you it's a hoax, but it's not a hoax, because it was on like 1,000 maps with several, like 100 cartographers, meaning map makers, that were spot on. And so you're going to see, like, a lot of these buildings, they'll go into the ground. Sometimes they'll have a door and a second floor window, but you wouldn't know it if you didn't know any better, because we've just been taught and brainwashed that, these buildings were all built in the 1800s. But, for instance, here's one, what's that building up there in Asheville? The largest house in the country of America. It's called the Vanderbilt home. Well, I don't live far from that. I'm a few hours, like an hour and a half away from there. It's in Asheville, North Carolina, and the Biltmore, and it is it's if you look at the mapping of it, it goes under the ground. But they'll tell you, that's for, the winery or something like that. But they're not. So a lot of these buildings, a lot of them have been dug out later on, and you'll find that there's a whole floor or sometimes two floors or a partial. Like you'll see sometimes where a place could have been flat now has an incline or a decline, and the building goes with it. And you'll find like places where they had to dig a hole to get to the door, you know, and put steps going into the ground, but you wouldn't build buildings like this. You can tell it's been retrofitted after, for instance, this liquefaction situation. In my opinion, 1812 was possibly the time that I believe the millennial kingdom ended and there was a rapture. I don't think there was a rapture during the tribulation. I believe the tribulation was in 70 AD. And Nero was the Antichrist, which would have been what Christ said. He was going to come back in that generation, you know, meaning within 40 years is typically a generation. And the disciples, the apostles, they knew it was imminent. A lot of times they'll tell you they didn't know any better, and they'll pawn off Christ's return 2,000 years later with so many different discrepancies. But what I'm trying to explain is I think that it has happened in 70 AD. They added 1,000 years to the calendar, and Satan was bound and he got loose maybe in 1812. And that's where he added that extra, say, 1,000 years to the calendar that we talk about often. Because you can't just really add time to the calendar with people running the earth. They're not going to accept that. Everybody has these different things like re-education camps, stuff like that. They did have these things, but I just believe that as soon as he was loose, if there was a rapture and there was nobody on the earth for the most part, because most people were raptured after the millennial kingdom ended, or something in that matter, then he could do whatever he wanted. He could change the calendar right then. There's no people there yet before they were reset. And then, you know, we have the situation where we have a bunch of children all over the earth. So a lot of people believe that when it talks about after the millennial kingdom would end, and the tribulation, there was a crucifixion, then and they had technology, but it got burnt up, in my humble opinion, in the tribulation, 70 AD. And when you see places like when you see like the Grand Canyon, a lot of people believe those were cities down in there. I mean, there's different things it could have been, you know. But it could have been cities because they look like they were melted in the fervent heat like liquid wax. And it talks about this kind of stuff. And a lot of times when you see mountains and hills, they may have been old buildings and structures that got melted in the fervent heat of the tribulation. But if it's covered up, nobody would really know. It talks about in the last days that a lot of people, even the very elect in Christ, would be, you know, sidetracked and would be, you know, unaware of a lot of the truths that were going on. They would be deceived. It says even the very elect in Christ would be deceived in the very end. Well, we like to talk about it like it's the tribulation coming and they're deceived on, you know, that Christ is king. But, you know, what if he's come and gone and all these structures that's called Greco-Roman Gothic mosques and cathedrals, castles, like these castle structures all over the earth, you know, in say Russia and stuff. We just didn't build them. Taj Mahal, you know, St. Peter's Basilicas. I just think they're all false narratives. I mean, it's obvious when you start to look into it. And how could they do it? Well, they're not just mere men that did this. This was planned out by the enemy, and he has powers to do things. And a lot of what he is the opposite of Christ. So if Christ has a bride, which is the body of Christ, then he has a body as well, the body of the enemy, right? Because he's a copy of the backwards version. And if the body is connected to the source, which is in this case, the enemy for the evil ones, then whoever was on the earth after the reset, there was just a few adults and a lot of children, almost like the adults got raptured and the children were left. Or, you know, it seems to be, you know, they talk about these Cabbage Patch Kids, but it seems like in the late 1800s, there was live kids, babies being birthed out of Cabbage Patches. And there is talk about this in the Word. And it does sound weird. But, you know, then it talks about that then the enemy would be loose for a short season, and then he would come against the saints. The whole earth would encircle them, the saints, or something like that, for the war of Gog and Magog. And so that's going to look again like a tribulation, like war. And a lot of people believe that the saints are at the North Pole, possibly because they're not here on the earth, but it seems like they would have to be according to the text. And then some people wonder, well, why would they cover up the millennial kingdom? Well, God would allow it because, if you knew that Christ came and ruled and reigned, you wouldn't need a whole lot of faith to believe that he is the Messiah. I mean, it would be, and that's what our life is partially about. To believing in salvation of Christ is to believe in faith, the childlike faith that he is who he says he is. And so that's a big part of, this salvation of the world, and so it wouldn't be fair if he was testing everybody else, but he didn't have to test you because you already knew he came and went. So you'd have to know he was the Messiah. And so I do believe that whoever is in the short season would be deceived for the most part. And, for a time, and then later on, people are awakening to it because God lets all truth. He talks in the word about all things would come to the surface truth-wise in the very end. And so that's why a lot of things are coming to truth, but it still looks like a mockery or you look like a crazy person. But that's up for discussion, and if you don't want to discuss it or look into it, then that's your issue. The church, the true church, is never going to look. They're always going to look. They're always going to promote a fake church as a true church. So you can't look at what you see on TV as the true church. A lot of times, God's church is going to be far and few between, and small groups, and not very. They're not going to be very gaudy and have tons of money like you see today. So you have to question those things. And, if Satan's the prince and the power of the air, meaning the TV screen and the media, then why would you ever want to listen to somebody off that TV screen? Okay, you got to know that there's a deception in it. If that's what he's called and that's what he's running and that's what they're running on. So anyway, there's something I wanted to talk about because some people believe that the saints are at the North Pole. You can't go to the North Pole, and the North Pole is different than what you think. And if the Messiah is there, with some people still believe that, the Jerusalem still could be there. Talk about bringing like the New Jerusalem or reigning from Jerusalem. Some people believe it could be a floating city that is up at the North Pole, and that's one reason why they won't let you go there, because they're still there until and with the camp of the saints at the North Pole until that war is brought upon them. And if you think about it, if it's on the earth, that is the center of the earth, so the whole world could encircle the camp of the saints at the North Pole. It would make a little sense. But I think the saints would have been the ones that ruled and reigned with him for 1,000 years. They would have been the ones that would have been in glorified bodies. But some people believe that if the New Jerusalem is there, that's why they blew up a lot of cities up in Siberia area way back when, because they don't want anybody up there. And if there's a floating city up there, maybe that's why there's two types of magnetic north, and then there's like the true north, and then there's that north that moves around on your compass. And some people believe the one that's moving around is actually the floating city of the Jerusalem, possibly, that moves around, and that's why the true north or whatever causes the compass to be different from the magnetic North Pole at the Polar Mountain at the center of the North Poles, because there's a floating city that's connected to it, and it's moving because it's floating. And at some point it would show itself, or God would allow it to be seen, and then they would say it was some sort of alien invasion, and maybe they would they would, maybe dispatch a bunch of alien space shuttles, because they're always saying we're gonna have an alien invasion, which I believe is a hoax, but they would use it in a situation like this, like dispatch little flying saucers to shoot at, us in these cities and stuff, and make it seem like it's coming from this group of people from this floating New Jerusalem city, and then they would, entice the world that we got to take these people out because they're evil and they're sending these saucers out to attack us, when none of it is of the truth. So anyway, I don't know if that you can follow that, or if you have questions, leave them in the comments and I'll speak on it for you. Thank you for watching, listening, like, subscribe, and give me a thumbs up. Love y'all. Peace. We out.